Good morning, everybody. It's Tom Christie back in the carving shop, and this will be session 2 of creating a hooded Merganser Drake in kind of a tucked head position. In session 1, if you haven't seen that, we went through the roughing out of the head, the insertion of the bill, and bandsawing the body out. In this session, we'll work on the details of the head before we get to roughing out the body in session 3. If you're enjoying my channel and getting value out of it, please consider hitting the subscribe button. That does help me out, and I would appreciate it. It's free, doesn't cost anything, but it helps me continue to build this channel for decoy carvers and wildfowl carvers. So let's get right to the detailing of the Hooded Merganser Drake head. Welcome back. Before we move any further, I did go back and take a little bit more wood out of the crest area and define the cheek a little bit more. So from the top, give you a view of that. There's more definition around where the cheek is and where the crest is. So I narrowed this area up a bit, still not to a point, but kind of narrowing back. And then I also put a little bit of a shadow cast here by cutting wood out of the crest area and then sanding it. So I used the 3/4 inch saber-tooth burr and removed that wood, and then used my sanding drum to just smooth things back. Now I want to put some definition around the cheek area, so I've penciled in some little curvatures here that I want to put in this area here as well, and we'll carve those next. I'm going to use this bullet-nosed ruby bit and go in, follow my pencil guidelines, and just carve a little groove in there in both locations. And we don't want these to be deep trenches where they look too harsh or cast a very dark shadow. I just want a very subtle shape here to give a little character to the face. And also in that tucked head position, this crease back here really comes up out of the neck area and just represents some feathers that are bunched there, and that's very characteristic of a bird in a tucked head position. So I'm going to take quite a bit of time putting these in and then softening them. I'm also redefining where that neck meets the head and digging that out a little bit more so that that casts a bit of a shadow down there as well. Also, this lower mandible groove kind of comes out and casts a shadow, and I want to make sure that we get that in place. I'll revisit that a little later in the video to talk more about that and carve that in. You can see it just takes quite a bit of time to soften these features, and it's very subtle, but you can see a little bit of a shadow there. I'll get the other side done. Now I'm going to use the sanding drum and just soften those further and just blend them up into that eye area and make sure everything is nice and round and smooth. And I won't spend too much time on this video. There's just repetition here, but using that 1/2 inch sanding drum to get in there and really, I like that corner edge. You can use it to sculpt with as well and just kind of soften everything up. So we'll jump ahead on this. After the sanding drum, I'm going to use some, probably 150 grit Swiss sandpaper and just soften everything, just finish up the look. And there's no substitute for hand sanding in some of these curved and recessed areas to get everything softened up. So I'll spend some time finishing the sanding here, and then we'll come back. All right, just a quick look at the status of the head before we start detailing the bill. I did, there's kind of a characteristic little down turn here in this area. So I relieved this area down here so that it casts a little bit of a shadow from above. And that kind of fades out as it goes back into the cheek. And then I blended those out, the cheek marks, so they're nice and soft. Now let's take a look at some of the characteristics of the merganser bill. This does not happen to be a hooded merganser bill, but it'll serve the purpose. Some key differences in a merganser bill, obviously how thin it is and narrow. There are a few distinguishing characteristics. The lower mandible is very visible on a merganser, along with a few of these, they're not teeth, but the structure inside to grab and hold on to fish and prey. There's a groove. The nostrils are thin and kind of long and narrow, and then there's a characteristic groove right here that goes from the front of the nostril up towards, clear to the front of the bill, and then the nail takes the entire width of the bill from the top down, as opposed to on other ducks that the nail is just a part of the width of the bill. Down below, the chin or the feathered area goes in a long V up towards and fades out here. So we'll put that in place. So just a few key characteristics, and now we'll take a look at the pattern and begin to lay out. I'm going to start by defining where the upper and lower mandible separate. You can see that starts right in the middle of this area here, comes down a bit, and is going to go up to the front here. So I'll get that laid out first and then be back. All right, I've got the separation of mandibles laid out. There's a little bit of an upturn. I'm going to use my knife carefully. This is very hard wood, this holly, so we're going to use extra caution. I can still score a clean line here. I also want to mention there's a little bit of a slight upturn near the tip of the bill here. So overall it gives it a little bit of a smiley look, but very characteristic of the merganser. So I've got that scored. I'll do that on the other side. And then I've got the nail penciled in. So first we'll separate the mandibles. Now I'm going to go to my little 1/8" cylindrical ruby bit and very carefully run along that mandible separation line and just remove a little bit of material from the lower mandible so that we get a little bit of a shadow cast from up above between the upper and lower mandible. You really have to have a firm grip here and be careful. There's not much working room here, so we don't want to have a slip and take off material from the upper mandible. I'm going over that again just to deepen it a bit. It's probably a 1/16 of an inch at most depth. And now I'm rounding that lower mandible and just cleaning things up in the corner as well. So you can see it casts a bit of a shadow. Now we have some separation there between upper and lower. I'm going to use the same bit here to put a little groove to define the nail of the bill. Once I have a little groove, then I'll round the nail back. This is not a real prominent feature. It's definitely there, but it needs to be pretty subtle. So I'm just taking off a little material on the bill side here so that the nail is raised somewhat from the rest of the bill. And then we want that nice and round. So I'm working to blend that in so that we don't have any kind of a ridge there, just a nice transition. I'll just pencil that in so it makes it a little easier to see. And then we'll do some sanding to smooth things up there. On this particular decoy, I'm going to work on a little bit of definition under the bill in the lower mandible. So I'm going to carve that groove in down below, kind of the V notch down below. And I'm using that little ruby cylindrical bit to do that. This is not a fully decorative bird, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time down here, but I also want to put a little bit of indication of that lower nail on the lower mandible. Just using that bit to then take that area in the V down a little bit so there's some structure there. Give you a look at that. I'll spend some time just smoothing things out and rounding things, but that's about all the detail I want to put on the lower mandible down here. That looks pretty good. I'll do some sanding and we'll be done down there. Now I want to look at this area surrounding the nostril and this groove and also the nostril opening itself. So we'll look at the pattern and use my dividers and get a dimension from the corner of the bill notch there to the opening surrounding the nostril. Transfer that. Sorry, that's off screen, but we'll transfer that to the carving. So I'm just putting the little indication so we get those distances correct. And now I can use that reference dimension to pencil in this groove that runs along the top of the upper mandible and kind of ties into the nostril enclosure here. I'm penciling that in. So we'll do that on both sides. Now I'm going to start with this little cylindrical ruby or diamond bit and use that to go around the nostril enclosure. Just cut a little groove in here to begin to define that enclosure. And then I'm going to carry that forward and carve in this notch or ridge that runs along the top of the upper mandible. This holly is a lot harder than the tupelo, so it just takes more time. But the holly holds a lot of nice detail as well, just a little bit more time consuming. So I'm using that bit to kind of form the nostril enclosure, kind of that almond-shaped enclosure, and then rounding out away from the nostril enclosure. We want to leave the nostril enclosure higher than the surrounding area. And then I'm rounding that groove that runs to the tip of the bill to the nail on both sides so that it's nice and soft. Now I'm going to change bits and go with this little flame-shaped ruby. And that shape really lends itself to cleaning up around the nostril enclosure, and with a little bit of curvature there and a pointed tip, it's nice to get in and blend around the nostril enclosure. And make sure we have a nice soft transition. I'm also using that tip to round the nostril enclosure itself. Just going to pencil in the nostril enclosure to make it a little more visible, and also that groove. Now I can go back to my pattern, and you wouldn't have to do this. You can eyeball it, but I like to do it just to keep symmetry from side to side, and I'm getting a dimension from the corner of the bill there to the opening, the nostril itself, and marking that location. And then the length of the nostril itself. Again, you could pencil this in. I've just over time gotten used to using my dividers to make sure I maintain symmetry. To me, it's very easy to get these nostrils off from side to side, either too far forward, too far back, up, down. So I like using the dividers to make sure I'm maintaining consistency there. Now I'm switching to the little ruby ball, and I'm going to use that to open up the nostril itself. There's not much room to work with, especially on this merganser bill, so we need to work carefully to avoid a slip here, but I'm just pressing that in and creating the nostril slot. Now I'm going to pencil in that nostril because it makes it a lot more visible, and we can take a look at where it's positioned and does it look right. I'll do some sanding, do the other side. There's also a groove that runs off the lower mandible here and along the length of the lower mandible, very similar to this one that runs along the length of the upper mandible. That comes, make sure I'm in the video here, that comes right off of this point and runs along the length of the bill here towards the tip. So we'll grind that in on both sides. I'm going to use this very small cylindrical diamond or ruby bit and just use the edge of that to create this groove that runs from the tip of the bill back to this area as it meets the face. So I'm taking out a little material under that groove so it's slightly lower. Not a lot. See if I can get a better view of this for you there. And I'll use some sandpaper to clean that up. So you can see it there. Now I want to work at installing the lamellae, and I did look that up. They're not teeth. They're these little angular structures pointed towards the rear or towards the face of the bird that help them grip their prey. And now that we have a little ridge established here, that gives us the opportunity to go in. And on this bird, I'm going to put in some lamellae, angle back in this little ridge here. And I'm going to do that with a wood burner. This is more detail, obviously, than you might want to get into, but for this particular bird, I'm going to use this tip on my wood burner, and it's shaped in a nice fashion to go in and do this. And I'm just hitting that at a relatively hot temperature and creating these little triangles. These fade out as they get close to the corner. But you can see the wood burner is pushing and removing wood down, and we're leaving these little angular shapes for the lamellae. These get pretty small as they get close to the tip and kind of fade out. But it's a nice, quick way of representing that structure, and it really gives it that merganser look, that sawbill look. And now I'll do some just light sanding to smooth things out. Pretty well have the bill completed. Now we work on the installation of the eyes. There's not a lot of surface area here on the bill, but I am going to use my embossing tool and just put a few wrinkles coming out from the edge here. The holly is very hard, so really have to press these in pretty good. It'll give it a little bit of, hopefully you can see that in the light, just a little touch of wrinkles around that area as it meets the face. Just another quick look at that. Put a few right here, a few coming off the notch, a few over there. Okay, I'm using my dividers in the pattern to get this distance from the top of the bill here to the front of the eye. Now I'm going to use my circle template, and I'm going to use a 10mm eye. Michael Braun eye. Mark the eye locations. Then I'm going to look from the front and see if they look level. See if I need to make any adjustments. You can see that I used the eye hole that I drilled earlier as a reference, but I don't count on it as the perfect location. I want to, after the carving is done like this, now is when I want to locate the eyes, and the drilled hole gives me a reference. But again, use my judgment on final positioning of the eye. This one looks a little low to me, so I'm going to scoot that one up. Once I get those set, then we'll open those up with a gouge. I'm just using a little 1/4 inch cupped gouge. A lot of people use an eye drill or a drilled hole. This is just the way I started doing it, and I'm comfortable with this approach. I'm using Epoxy Sculpt. It's a 2-part putty, epoxy putty, and mixing equal parts together. And I'll get that done. I've got the Michael Brown eyes here, really nice pinpoint or small pupil divery looking eyes for Hooded Merganser. So I'll get this mixed up and then we'll come back and install these eyes. All right, I have the putty mixed to a consistent color, which is critical. And now I'm going to take some water and dampen the eye hole and the area around the eye hole, just to promote bonding of the putty. And push the putty in and kind of clear it off. Set that aside for now. Now I'm going to put the eye in place, and I'm going to crowd the front of the hole I created, because that's the dimension that I'm looking for, from the point of the bill here to the front of the eye. And I'm going to put a little forward cant and a little downward cant in the eye, and I'd like to still see the pupil from the front whenever possible. Gonna press that in quite a ways. Now I'm going to get a little of the putty and just push it around on the lower side and also up above, so I have a little material to work with as I smooth it out. Now I'm going to dip my finger in the water and begin smoothing this. And I want to blend it into the surrounding wood so I don't have to do a lot of sanding above and below. Remove any excess epoxy. Right now I'm not worried about the eye opening. I'm just kind of smoothing things out around. Then we can go back. I've got an old 1/8 inch scrubber that has been filled up and retired from the painting bench, but it works as a nice tool for this purpose, to kind of open up the area around the eye and move this putty material around. So it's kind of an iterative process. I'll open some up, smooth it out, go back and open up a little bit more until we get the right shape. So I want a nice eye channel going forward toward the bill. A little softer brush here so I can begin to shape the eye opening. I'll continue to work with that. This takes some time to get it right and get your eye the eye set is really critical to how the carving is going to project life. So I spend quite a bit of time on eye set to make sure I'm happy with the way it looks. So I'll come back when I get that done. We'll do the other side as well. Okay, that eye looks pretty good. Now I'm going to go to the other side. Just a quick look at the eye set. Starting to bring the bird to life for sure. So I'm going to let that cure, and then we'll start working on the body. Just another quick note, one thing I do like about the epoxy sculpt is after it's cured, it's very carvable, and they'll be able to use an X-Acto or a knife and really finalize the shape of the eye opening. I think I'm pretty close, but some refinement after it cures. Well, that's a good place to wrap up session 2 of carving the Hooded Merganser Drake. And we've finished with the head details. And in session 3, we'll tackle the body. So until then, Tom Christie signing out. Good carving to you.